I took over at the start of 2020 and COVID hit literally 2 months after I took over the leadership of AHL. And every single one of the team left.
So let me rewind a little bit and try and understand how you got to this point. You become the CEO of AHL Venture Partners.
Results and transparency.
What are some of the biggest risks of managing a family office?
The family don't need to do this. So if I'm not relevant and I'm not delivering results, why allocate time?
And then why did you decide to pick this particular type of institution to work for?
It is an imprudent long-term investment strategy. You need to make sure you've got some exposure to this continent.
Welcome to the Doers Defined podcast, where our mission is to amplify emerging market heroes bringing positive change. Today, our guest is Rosanne Whalley, who's a dear friend to me. She has been in the African private equity and venture capital space for over 15 years. You're currently the CEO of AHL Venture Partners, and I should probably explain that it was founded in 2007 by Adolf H. Lundin, and they happen to be one of the wealthiest families in the world. And your role, if I'm correct, within AHL Venture Partners is that you provide private equity, venture debt, and in addition to that, technical assistance for high growth, small and medium enterprises. So I am so delighted to have you here and to not just know you from a personal standpoint, but also to discuss your professional life a little bit.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great honor.
And so, Rosanne, if you were going to speak to the average African, how would you explain to them what a family office is?
So a very good question, a little bit challenging. So maybe I'll explain more broadly what family office is and then how I would contextualize and explain specifically about AHL. So I think it's really where a family has been fortunate enough to amass enough wealth that they want to have a very intentional and thoughtful way about how to continue growing that wealth in a responsible way that can be multi-generational. Most of us don't have the opportunity necessarily to amass that level of wealth, but I think, increasingly there are many people, especially in the global north, but increasingly on the continent too, who are succeeding at raising and earning a lot of wealth. And I think people are now actively beginning to think about, how do I put that into a well-structured vehicle that has a clear investment mandate, that is diversified, and increasingly with many next gen coming online, maybe people are beginning to think, well, what can I do to positively impact the world and leave a legacy? And so really, I think that's what a family office is. In the context of AHL Venture Partners, it was really created in honor of Adolf H. Lundin. When he passed away, it was created just before he passed away. It was an acknowledgement that they really wanted to create a legacy. So to reflect on the fact that this was a family that has made a lot of money in oil gas mining, and that they had a really strong bias to business and entrepreneurship. And they didn't want to necessarily give it to a charity, as much as there's need for charitable activities. They really wanted to do it through the lens of entrepreneurship. And as such, they created this pool of capital that can never be returned to them. So that's really important.
That's interesting.
With an explicit mandate to do investing in developed markets, particularly Africa. And so that is the pool of capital that I manage on behalf of the family office. Of course, the Lundins have a much larger family office that tends to be primarily focused around oil, gas, mining and real estate, as is the case with many global family offices.
And then why did you decide to pick this particular type of institution to work for?
I mean, I would say at times, possibly because I'm not that employable insofar as I quite like being the boss. And I have worked through my career in organisations where there were a lot of guidelines and frameworks imposed by the capital that was coming from the LPs. And although I completely understand that, in the end, whomever has the capital, to an extent, calls the shots. And entrepreneurs out there, I'm sure, are nodding, going, oh my goodness, this is how we feel with so many of our investors. But the reality is, for us as investors, we're often facing the same constraints. It's so often our LPs, our limited partners, who are funding us, who then call the shots. And especially in this part of the world, so many funds are predominantly funded via development finance institutions, who really then call the shots as to how you go about thinking about developing your investment strategy, where you invest, how you invest, and the like. And of course, there's a need for that. And of course, they have many of their frameworks and rules and guidelines for good reason. But my deep concern has always been that that doesn't necessarily enable you to provide the right kind of capital for these markets. And so I was particularly excited when I had the opportunity to work for AHL, because I was able to find a very like-minded family who had allocated this capital for the continent, but whose entire way of operating is find great people, great teams, and then empower them to lead and build the strategy. And so I've been incredibly privileged because the family behind AHL really gave me and my team the mandate to create the right investment strategy for the continent and what we want to achieve. And so that is a huge privilege. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure we'll get into it. There'll at times be other challenges.
Yes.
But in my opinion, it makes for a really exciting place to work and a place where I feel like I've got a high degree of agency and control to really try and provide solutions for this continent that really work, rather than being constrained by, dare I say it, ticking a lot of boxes of kind of what gets imposed by that kind of DFI LP capital.
Rosanne, that's a very thoughtful answer. So thank you for that. And then I think next, I would like to understand, how do you work with a family to define the long-term goals? And that's financial, and then in terms of impact as well. How do you go about that?
So maybe I'll go a little bit back in time. So AHL was originally created in 2007. And as I'd said earlier, it was created with the mandate to take a really entrepreneurial approach to economic development. So fundamentally, it was, let's back businesses that can have both impact and returns. Very early on, because there wasn't much of a team on the continent, AHL did a lot of fund investments, highly catalytic at a time where the market was still fairly nascent. Fast forward, we then started doing a lot of early stage equity investing. And I think it's fair to say that it was at times quite an impact first strategy. And we know it is challenging investing and yielding returns and getting that liquidity from the markets that we're in. And so when I was asked to take over the leadership of AHL Venture Partners, the family actually gave me one mandate. They just said, get self-sustaining.
Wow, what a privilege. But also daunting.
So this is it. So maybe we'd tracked a path that many family offices or foundations start on. They start with a great endeavour, a lot of enthusiasm, ambition. Let's get the capital out the door. Let's do deals. This is really fun. And what we amassed was 36 investment positions, limited liquidity, We know exits are really hard. And really a portfolio that was not particularly manageable. It was just too large. The assets under management were too low. The complexity was too great. And we probably invested in too many impact first business models that didn't really have the scope of really truly getting to scale and returning our investment. So as I say, I was given that very clear guidance, get sustainable. That was helpful in that it gave me a short-term North Star. So I set about really focusing on how do I create liquidity in my portfolio and how do I create returns as quickly as possible. We managed to do that. We pivoted. We started doing a lot more debt. It's inherently self-liquidating. In fact, the returns in direct lending tend to outperform equity on the continent still today. It's counterintuitive, of course, but it's often to do with time value of money and timelines to exit. What's been interesting, though, is as we hit those milestones, the challenge then became, well, now what? So what is our impact thesis? What is our actual investment strategy? And the family had no specific guidelines on what they wanted. So in some regards, that was great. It gave me a complete blank slate to work out, okay, well, what do I truly believe? And so over the last couple of years, it's been quite a journey of, I will say, iteration. I'm sure at times my team and my colleagues are like, what the hell are we doing? We don't get it. We kind of seem to be able to do everything, but then, lots of stuff we don't do. And so we've taken a lot of time, spending a lot of time educating the family, bringing them through this journey. And we've moved really slowly, intentionally slowly, because what I didn't want to do is suddenly go, right, we do seed equity, wham, bam, 2 years later, we've done 15 deals and then find that actually, I'm not sure that is the right strategy. So we've gone slowly. We've gone slowly in terms of trying to rebuild our strategy. We've gone slowly in terms of trying to really spend time with the family to understand what gets them excited. And that's not been straightforward because I never got any mandate. So I've had to slowly but surely eke out from different family members what really gets them excited and engaged. But in the end, there's two things that gets them excited and engaged: results and transparency. So if you deliver on what you say you're going to do, what I found is that they don't necessarily mind. Obviously, different people have different approaches, but in the case of our family office, the family members, what they wanted to see is a team who say, we're going to go and deploy this amount, we're going to go and be sustainable, we're targeting this type of impact, and this is going to be our cost base, and to systematically deliver, and to then be super transparent, report it all. I treat them like any other board. We have very comprehensive reporting. We are super transparent. They never asked that of me. It was a very kind of laissez-faire approach, but I thought to myself, no, I really want to run a professional investment firm. And if I'm going to do that with the team that we've built, we need to adhere and hold ourselves to the high standards. And so we've just been consistent in saying, we're going to do this, and then we delivered it, and then we reported on it. And what that ultimately does is it builds trust.
Yeah.
Family offices are all about trust. And so in a way, once you've got trust, you're on a journey together. And then the strategy you can co-create. You can evolve it over time. And let's be honest, family offices are multi-generational.
Yep.
Our strategy is going to keep evolving. The market's going to shift. The family members are going to shift. The team will shift. And we've got the benefit and ability to just shift. But the key is trust. Everything needs to be based on a deep mutual respect and trust. And that's what I've worked really hard at building over the last years.
Oh, wow. That's very sound advice. So what role does succession planning play? And then how do you involve the next generation in decision making?
It's been an interesting one because through at least my career with AHL, we did have effectively the kind of patriarch of the family pass away.
That was Adolf himself.
So it was actually his eldest son. And he was the individual whom I interacted the most with in the early days. And as I said, it's so much about trust and personalities. And, you know, for whatever reason, I still sometimes kind of wonder why. But the individual, you know, decided he liked me. He wanted to support myself and the team I was building. But as I say, he passed away 2 years ago. And what's been very interesting is that has shifted the dynamics in the family office. In the past, I had one primary point of contact, really. One individual who was the primary decision maker across effectively himself and his 3 siblings. So he was the primary decision maker for 4 branches. With his passing, his really incredible 4 sons took over a lot of the business activities. And I had no relationship with them.
Third generation,
no relationship with his 4 sons. And then it went from 1 to effectively 4 branches, but then his branch also being 4.
Wow.
And so overnight, it went from a high level commitment for substantial additional capital and very bullish about the continent, investing in Africa, etc., to no one really knowing what it was that I was doing. Many of the family members, honestly, either not that interested or not knowledgeable. You know, fair enough. They don't have time. They're running multi-million-dollar companies.
That's
you know,
true.
so they're super, super busy. You know, do they really want to spend time getting up to speed on what it is that I'm doing, which is such a small part of the kind of broader portfolio of the family activities? And so it's been a very interesting journey. It was definitely a bit of a setback for a while, but it's also given an opportunity, and this is, I think, what's also quite exciting, of giving other family members voices that they didn't necessarily have before. And so now we have 2 of the branches very engaged. And I have to say I'm working really hard at that next gen, so effectively the 3rd generation, to get them engaged. And I'm really lucky because I've got one of the next gen family members who he actually manages his own VC fund in Europe. So he's got a lot of the finance background and knowledge of investing. And he is an absolute champion and advocate, but I also feel it's a 2-way street. I hope and think, you know, he learns and benefits from what we're doing, and he sits in our investment committee. But similarly, I get so much market intel and exposure through the type of investing he's doing in Europe. And he'll often be, you know, sharing transactions that he's looking at, working on. And what's great is that has really begun to unlock the first steps we're taking to the real family office capital. So what I said at the start, which was we're managing a pool of capital that is technically within a charitable foundation. So it can never go back to the family. So in the end, we can get great results there. But does the family really want to put more capital into that structure? Not really, because I'll never be able to get any of the returns and benefit from it. Now, on a deal-by-deal basis, we're doing direct co-investments with the different parts of the family office. And so now what's interesting is I'm dealing with lots of different family members and trying to create kind of coalitions between one branch and another branch. And a lot of that is also about getting that next gen engaged in what it is that we're doing. And one of the ways we do that is once a year, we bring as many of the family members who are keen to the continent, come and meet the team.
That's great.
Come and lie on the beach in Diani, go on safari, just really embrace what is so amazing about this continent. Everything from the fantastic team that we have at AHL to the incredible portfolio, and also all the amazing just wildlife, nature, etc. And so we try and do that to just get their buy-in, their emotional buy-in. Because it's about relationship, but it's also about storytelling.
That's what we always forget about investing. There's a human side.
You've got to pique their interest to put time and money and effort into it. And so once a year, we try and get them out here and just get them really energized and engaged with what it is that we're doing and buying into the incredible impact that so many of our businesses are having.
So let me rewind a little bit and try and understand how you got to this point. So can you walk me a little bit through your journey in terms of how you become the CEO of AHL Venture Partners?
I think it's fair to say that it's a whole load of good luck and I suppose hard work, maybe hand in hand. I mean, for most of you out there, you probably assume that people who are in investing did loads of finance. I mean, I studied at university politics, philosophy and economics. And in my very first job interview after I'd finished my master's, and just to give context, both my parents ran their own businesses. And I always, I had the privilege to travel quite a bit. My parents super adventurous. My mum's quite a hippie. So we did quite a lot of off the beaten track, trekking through Borneo jungle when I was 12 and living with a tribe in the jungle for a week. So we did all sorts of things that got me really excited about the world out there and just the amazing things, but also the immense inequality in our world. And so I wanted to do something that covered impact, but that also covered business. And quite frankly, I didn't know anything about investing. I really hadn't a clue what investing was. As I say, I was interested in business and impact. And I was lucky enough to see a job advert on my university notice board. And long story short, I got the job. And in that job interview, I was asked, what do you know anything about finance? And I was like, well, I did a expense claim in an internship. Does that count? And
times are so different.
So different. But somehow I suspect, because what it was a startup fund. It was the ex-chairman of Rothschild Investment Bank, who, using his own wealth, wanted to set up a fund to invest in agri in Africa. And really what they needed is someone who could just roll up their sleeves, I think was pretty low ego in terms of just willing to do everything from book flights to Google online how to find a term sheet and populate a term sheet to do. In the end, I ran for 5 years all their accounting. I studied loads of finance in evening classes to obviously get up to speed, because you do need the basics of finance to be an investor.
Yeah.
But and so I did that, and I was really lucky because I was second hire into that fund and it grew really rapidly. I got the privilege of then being the country manager, managing a number of investments in Mozambique. I had a great boss there from whom I was able to learn from as well. But I think it's fair to say, age 27, at that point when I moved to Mozambique, I took on a lot of responsibility, probably more than I might normally have, but it's because I managed to grow up so quickly in what was a startup investment firm. Switched across to infrastructure for a while. Didn't love it. I know you're in that, but I found it a little bit
it's hard.
Big, slow and dry. And then, I joined AHL, and I suppose I didn't join, just to be clear, as the CEO. I joined actually as the senior investment manager. But again, I think that business was going through a lot of flux. And when to my earlier point about relationships, I was really lucky. I sat down next to the principal of the Lundin family for one lunch. I'm telling you, he put me through my paces. I mean, he said everything controversial, challenging, trying to get a reaction from me, but I obviously managed to somehow impress him that I was a credible contender to be CEO. And out of the blue, I got a call from one of the family members and someone senior at the family office saying, "You've got 2 weeks, we'd like you to be CEO. Tell us what you want, tell us your salary, tell us what you need to take on the role, but we think you can do it. We want you to do it, but you've got 2 weeks to decide.
What a terrific story. But I think also a reminder that you just don't know who's watching, who's evaluating you. And ultimately, I think it's almost putting your best foot forward all the time, because you don't know where that next opportunity is going to come from. But I also do know you personally, and you are a real go-getter. So I'm sure you dazzled him away during that lunch.
Well, I probably disagreed. I actually probably disagreed and just stood firm. And I think that that's also one of the insights. Like, you've just got to be true to yourself. You know, I think that that's actually the most important thing. Put your best foot forward. But have a strong conviction loosely held. Do you know what I mean? Like, have views. Be willing to be challenged, but have views. Because I think at the time, a lot of he was quite challenging of impact investing. You can't make money. You can't make money in the company. Like, all this kind of stuff, to really try and challenge me as to what my convictions were about our ability to do great investing in this part of the world, have impact, but also get returns.
Well, I've really enjoyed listening to that. So then who or what has been a major influence on your work and your approach to leadership?
Look, I'd say it was very hard when I took over. I took over a really challenging portfolio. I mean, some great assets in there, really great portfolio of entrepreneurs. But I think in terms of from the investor perspective, so it's nothing about, undermining or diminishing the quality of the portfolio, but from an investment perspective, we had 36 positions, just short of about 36 million assets under management. So if you're an investor, you know that the economics there are just very, very challenging, limited to no liquidity. So every year, I was under pressure to keep my costs low because our AUM was low. I wasn't generating income, so I was under pressure from the family not to grow my
AUM, assets under management.
And just to be super clear, normally your fees to cover your costs are a percentage of your assets under management. So if your assets under management are too small, it starts making your whole economics of your fund quite challenging. So I had this real pressure to keep my costs low. And I took over at the start of 2020 and COVID hit literally 2 months after I took over the leadership of AHL. And every single one of the team left.
And why? Oh, because, they
as
just
part
needed
of the
relocation.
Change. It was just the full change that underwent with the family. They just wanted new leadership, and a number of people left simultaneously with that. So, put bluntly, I took over 36 assets that were not performing from a financial perspective, where the complexity was just absolutely outsized. I mean, when I even talk about 36 investments, I'm not just talking about 36 companies. 36 companies is one thing, but in many of those companies, we might have had like 3 or 4 transactions. So, the level of complexity to try and wrap your head around and manage. And so if I'm honest, I didn't have time to engage with other people. Like, I didn't have a mentor or coach at the time. It was survival mode. So through 2020 and 2021, it was head down, do everything myself. But clearly that is not a strategy. That's a tactic.
And that's not sustainable.
100%. So it is a tactic to survive that can get you quite far, but it also completely burns you out. And so I really had to start zooming out and ask myself, how do I actually build an investment firm? And more importantly, how do I actually build the team? Because everything is about the team. And I'll be honest, I was not equipped to do that when I took over the role. I hadn't actually done that. I'd been an investor. I was really good at closing deals. I'm really good at like cranking through a term sheet and getting a deal out the door. I had not learned how to think about building culture. Like, what is culture? I didn't even know what my own culture was that I wanted to try and build within AHL. And so I had a couple of people whom I hired who were brilliant. One of whom was my former CFO, Keith Davies. He ended up getting an amazing job at one of our portfolio companies. I could hardly begrudge that, but it was a tough blow. But I really, at the end of 2021, I remember turning to my husband and saying, I either quit or I really profoundly changed my strategy here, because this is not working. I am not building a great team. I am tending to micromanage. I'm doing the bulk of everything myself. I'm completely burnt out. I'm now pregnant at the time.
I think we talked about that.
This is not feasible. And so what I did is I really shifted gears and thought, who do I need to bring into this business to build the culture and the team that I really want? And I was really lucky. It was actually on advisement from Keith, my former colleague. He said, well, why don't you chat to one of his former colleagues, an individual called Brad McGrath, who was one of the co-founders at Zona, a fintech that was massively successful and then hit some challenges. And I tell you, to your very first question around who has helped me on my journey and think about leadership and think about things like culture, Brad had built a business. He built a culture. He built a team. He really had a lot of thought and intentionality around this. But he hadn't been an investor. So we were incredibly complementary, because everything I was really good at, he was less experienced in, but everything he was fantastic at, to be honest, I was pretty dismal at. And so I managed to persuade him to join me. And I said, come, it's pretty much a blank slate. We're together going to build this team. And that's what we set about doing. He joined at the very start of 2022. And he really helped me work out what culture it is we wanted to build together. He kind of guided me in terms of that intentionality of really what it is that you're trying to build. And he was fantastic with people. And there's this fantastic analogy, and this may resonate for entrepreneurs out there, because I do feel like I kind of went on this entrepreneurial journey. Brad showed me this video, music festival, like 5,000 people, and there's one person standing up in the middle of this music festival, like dancing, arms up in the air, acting like a complete crazy person, and everyone is just like looking. And about 2 minutes into the video, one other person gets up and starts dancing next to this person, and about 3 minutes later, you've got 5,000 people raving in this music festival. And Brad was my second person. And I feel like now we're about to have like 5,000 people jumping up, because I really think we're building something really special in AHL. But that's because it's actually not because of me. It's because of that number two that then catalyzes that whole next load of people to kind of stand up and get on board and buy in. And that's where I feel I am. And so I'd say, there'd be many people in my life who I look to and whom I've learned from and all the rest. But I'd say that on my kind of more entrepreneurial journey, it's really been my colleague Brad who helped tip it from a tactic of survival to real strategy and culture to build a great team. And now we've set the foundation to hopefully be a significant player on the continent.
Just how graceful. One, I think, too, because I think you also have to know yourself to be able to identify what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And I think very often when we are type A personality, you kind of want to shove the weaknesses aside.
Yeah.
So I think it's also a testament to you. And just listening to Brad, I'm like, Brad, I'm coming to look for you. I definitely want to meet you. Yeah. But thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So just very honest, I think it definitely takes a village to succeed. So under your leadership, AHL Ventures is now an evergreen fund that has about $100 million in assets under management. And I'd love to understand, what's your process of identifying investments that you'll add into your portfolio now that you've kind of refined and restructured the organization?
Yeah. So this has been a journey to work out. I think what we really want to do, and what I've been doing, is I've really been trying to look at the market and really understand where things are working less well, where I see opportunity gaps in the market. That's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, we've also got to play to our strengths and really reflecting on how is AHL uniquely structured to win. And so I've really thought deeply over the last couple of years around these two aspects to develop our investment strategy. And what we do is we fundamentally look for the best teams with really great business models having impact that can truly scale. That is at the core of what we do. And then we ask ourselves, what funding solution can we provide you? And how do we support your business growth and journey over the years? Because we're in a lifetime value of customer business, we don't want to do a one-off transaction. And we're evergreen, so we're a permanent capital vehicle. So we want to go on a growth journey with really brilliant teams, as I say, with great business models in a scalable business model market. So that is, in a nutshell, what it is we do. Then the obvious question is, well, okay, doesn't everyone do that? Like, that sounds a little bit like obvious. Well, actually, I don't think everyone does do that. And I tell you why. I think, obviously, all of what I just described are part of investment criteria. But the thing is, I think most firms in an African context have fairly specific mandates. So it's either, we do fully senior secured debt, or we do Series A equity or pre-seed equity, or we do a specific geography, or we do a specific sector. Now, that's great because you build quite a lot of specialism. The challenge, in my opinion, with that strategy, though, is that our markets are still relatively small and capital markets are relatively shallow.
That's true.
And so what is easier for an investor to do? Is it easier to structure different products, or is it easier to find a whole load of really great teams? I'm fairly sure I know the answer from my perspective. It's a lot harder to find a whole load of really great teams than it is to structure a whole load of different funding products. Like, that is what, as investors, we get really good at. The finding the great team, there's not always that many incredible teams out there doing, really interesting, scalable businesses. And so our strategy is small, tight portfolio, and then go on a journey. So we may start with, let's just say, a working capital loan. A small working capital loan, we're going to dip our toe in, we're going to get to know you, we're going to build a relationship. You obviously, you first have to get through our initial screening, which is what we call internally our dating profile. So it's we're looking for a great
no
team,
red flags,
a great team, business model, impact, and scalability, and we've kind of defined those out. And And so we've kind of got that macro criteria. But then our view is you get through that criteria, then we look at what funding product you need that's right for your business. And it's not that we'll do everything. We've got a limited suite of products that will tailor and adjust for the specifics of your business. But it could also be that, at the point of engaging with you, you're not actually ready, or we're not ready to fund you at that point in time. So then we'll put you on the side in terms of, this is a team we really want to build a relationship with. This is a team we want to track, we want to get to know. Maybe we'll never invest in you, but maybe we'll end up referring you. Maybe at some point you'll do a partnership, some type of collaboration with someone in our portfolio. Maybe you'll end up hiring one of my team. Hopefully not. But
yeah, maybe Brad.
Yeah. But ultimately, that's what we're looking for at the very macro level. And then we overlay the product, because our view is we're in market. The whole team's in market. We've got people on the team who have real operating experience. And most businesses go through all sorts of growth challenges along the way. And so I much rather have a really deep relationship with a business, know that we're in the trenches with you. We've defined a terminology called, we invest in fat investors, entrepreneurs. It's not what you may think. It's fair, aligned, accountable, and transparent. They are some of the traits that we're looking for in the teams that we back. So we're looking for these fat entrepreneurs whom we can build a great relationship with, and then we'll be your funding partner through that journey. So to give you an idea, we invested in Copa back in 2012. I think we are the only equity investor who's participated in 8 funding rounds. But then on top of it, we've done 3 bridge debt transactions with her. And we're literally about to close a pretty substantial bridge debt deal where we've just brought in another family office and institutional investor as the syndicate lead. So that, again, is an example where our lifetime value of our customer is really great. We've built a really good relationship, but we're not the lead. So we don't lead the funding, the equity raises typically. We're much more that long-term funding partner,
which is so crucial. And I think there's not enough of it in the industry.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, most GPs out there, general partners, are constrained by the source of their capital and the typical close-ended fund structures. Whereas you see, because, we have a flexible mandate, we're permanent capital, we have a team in market, and we have a really operating focused team, take those together, I think we can really go on that funding journey with you. And along the way, we may do less, and maybe that's actually a good thing.
Yeah, that's
right.
Always.
At times, you don't want all your investors leaning in. So at times we may lean out, at other times we may lean in, but we can kind of go on that journey. And as I say, our strategy is not X number of specific deals within a limited 3-year investment period. Our strategy is great businesses, teams, impact at scale, and we'll go on a 15-year growth journey with you.
And so where are you going to look for these teams? If you are out here looking within the ecosystem, there's a lot of noise, Rosanne. So how do you kind of, take out all the chaff and you're like, okay, that's a winner right there?
So I think what I'm going to call out there is that because of what you said, there is a tendency to divert to networks. And what does that mean? You tend to, especially as a non-African, you often tend to gravitate to whom you might be meeting socially. You're building all of those points of trust. It's a challenge. So it's a really good question, and it's something we've been discussing internally a lot. Because we're in the relationship business, we're in the business of building relationships, building trust. That is less transactional. And if it's less transactional, it leads itself, of course, to, where are you meeting each other? The regular touch points, the referrals, all that type of stuff. And if we're not careful, we're going to end up perpetuating, a lot of foreign capital being managed by, the leadership, a foreigner, going into a lot of non-local founders. So we're really challenging ourselves to think about how do we broaden out our networks? Because I don't think, unfortunately, because we're quite niche and we can do quite large amounts of capital over time. So normally we'll start maybe at about $1 million, but over time,
that's the first check.
Usually,
$1 million.
exactly.
Okay.
But over time, especially with access to co-investment capital from the family, we can be scaling to up to kind of $10, $20 million cumulatively invested in a company. So, we're not really in the business for unsolicited kind of like inbound inquiry. That's just, we're a way too small a team. We're 8 people. We don't have the bandwidth. And until AI can beautifully screen for us, we're not there. Yeah. It's a lot of work. So it tends to be primarily referral. And so again, you just got to be really careful, because that again can precipitate the same kinds of networks, the same kind of people getting referred. So on a very personal basis, I'm really challenging myself to be much more open, getting into different types of networks. I mean, even just things like Women Who Build Africa. We just recently sponsored that to try and get, engaged in more networks with more diversity, both in terms of gender and local representation. So we haven't cracked it perfectly. So,
and I know this has been an ongoing conversation that we've had. And I think perhaps maybe even precisely why I started the podcast was to showcase so many incredible people, but we're not always telling those stories. And so again, to diversify, and also to showcase so many other brilliant people from very diverse and different backgrounds, doing all sorts of different things and amazing things for the continent. And then perhaps, it will help to shed a light on what they're doing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I appreciate it greatly. And I think it's really needed. And, I think the challenge though is we're such a small team and we do a lot. I mean, I'm on the board of a number of companies. We're obviously doing transactions. We're also working on exits. We're also actually looking to launch a third-party fund anchored by the family, and we've got a couple of other family officers interested in participating, but hoping to get that off the ground next year to raise more capital. So, we've got a lot on our plate, and so again, spending a lot of time out in origination, we don't have that much time, and hence why qualified leads become so important. And so maybe, my one point of advice would be, if you're an entrepreneur out there, you need to try and get into some of these qualified lead channels, because especially kind of more your family office type organizations, we're very small. We're usually a very small number of members in the team. And so we don't have this whole origination machine that you can kind of get into. You really need to get through the door by a referral. It's not easy, it's not straightforward, I appreciate that, but to the extent you can navigate that way in, and obviously it behooves us also to broaden those referral channels, but I still don't see us substantially moving away from that anytime soon, because we just don't have the capacity as a team to start, running big funding windows and receive inbound inquiries and all that type of thing.
Well, thank you, because that's very candid, and I think it's a problem and also an opportunity. I think if you're listening to this podcast as an entrepreneur, but I'm excited about the work that you're doing, and just phenomenal. So I think my role as I'm listening to you, is perhaps to broaden that. I think a lot of the qualified leads, as I'm doing this podcast and as I'm meeting a lot more entrepreneurs within the ecosystem. So I'll certainly be sharing and sending some your way as well. And then let me ask, what are some of the biggest risks of managing a family office? And then how do you mitigate them?
Yeah, it's I think fundamentally the family don't need to do this. So if I'm not relevant and I'm not delivering results, why allocate time? Because they can actually walk away from it. They could afford to walk away from it. So in a way, the biggest risk is that I have a massive change of heart that comes, from my perspective, out of the blue from the family, because tomorrow they could just fire me. They could just decide, actually, they want to give all the money away, and they want to give it all away to, whatever cause. They could just unilaterally decide that, and I would have zero recourse. And everything that I would have kind of built with the team wouldn't really matter. And so I think, again, it comes back to alignment and trust. And a lot of what I keep focusing on is don't get me wrong, I have a very strong conviction about what we should be doing as AHL investing in these markets. And I'm not, in a way, I'm doing that in a very self-interested way, right? Like, I'm really passionate about building, hopefully, we may never get there, but hopefully a really great investor in Africa. But I need the family on board with that vision. And if they're not, then I'm going to have big challenges. And so one of the ways I do it, as I say, is it's building the trust, clarity of reporting, doing more storytelling. I'm not naturally a storyteller.
I was not naturally a storyteller, right? And you see me on this other side.
I get shit done, right? I'm an operator. Yeah, I'm a transactor. Yeah. But again, the power of storytelling is really important. And we're getting better at that as an organisation. And again, I've got a great colleague who's really thinking a lot about that. He's leading everything about impact and ESG for us, as well as our CFO, being our CFO. But I think I've just got to keep the family engaged and passionate about what we're doing, and get them excited about the multi-generational aspect. And so what I keep trying to do is say, look, we're doing that the next 6 months under our OKRs. This is our budget. We're doing this over 12 months. We're doing this over 24 months. But in 20 years, this is what it could be. And actually, when you start thinking on that kind of time horizon, it's really exciting because it could be massive. I mean, I've kind of said to them, why could we not be the equivalent of a Gates Foundation, but obviously with more of the focus on the commercial investing, but why not position it as that level of kind of aspiration? Because ultimately, success follows success. So that analogy from earlier, we've got maybe, 8 people jumping around like mad people in this music festival. But really, what could this be if we keep delivering quarter after quarter under our OKRs? In 20 years' time, this could be outsized in terms of what AHL could be. And so I think I do try quite hard to say, look, this is also your legacy. It's in the name of your grandfather. I'm incredibly passionate about it. I think you can achieve so much with it. And I'm a custodian for now. I'm driving the strategy, I'm driving the execution, but I'm a custodian for a period of time. And then I'm going to be handing it on to the next person to continue growing it. And so I think, again, that really resonates with the family, because it's not positioned as this is entirely a self-interested, I'm trying to just maximize my income and my track record and career. And I'm not. A lot of the times I think to myself, oh, I'd love to do that deal. That'd be a really good deal for my track record. But I'm like, does it really make sense for AHL right now? Probably not. And I'm more interested in building AHL, the organisation, the machine that can scale over time to do really fantastic investing on the continent, rather than singularly focused on my deal sheet and track record, for example. Because in the end, I do think they become one and the same.
They're one and one. Yeah, they go hand in hand.
But I think there are times along the journey where they're not fully synced up or aligned. But I do still always tend to focus on building AHL because in the end, that is the North Star. Because I do that, it will scale. I'll continue to get more capital from the family. They'll increasingly be ambassadors of what we're doing. They're already beginning to unlock third-party capital to attract into what we're doing. And so it's really, we've created the foundation for something actually that can be much, much larger. Mm. And in the end, what really gets me excited or energized is the fact that this continent needs hundreds of billions of dollars of private capital a year.
Absolutely.
To try and hit the SDGs, combat climate change, etc. And fundamentally, we've got a massive challenge in our market, which is that most of the capital is still coming from predominantly government sources. And that's just not sustainable. And on top of it, don't get me wrong, private capital does not solve every problem, for sure not. And there have to be many checks and balances. But only public capital does also not solve the problem.
That's true.
And so right now, one of the biggest challenges facing impact investing and investing in the continent more broadly is that we're just struggling to mobilize private capital. And I think there is so much family office capital out there that doesn't know how to go about deploying into our markets. And so as AHL, we really want to position ourselves as that conduit.
And the roadmap. You're providing the roadmap on
it's
how to
exactly
do it.
that. How to do it responsibly, patiently, with impact, with disciplines, and with return. And we're not going to mobilize private capital and family office capital if we can't get at least reasonable returns. Maybe they're not fully risk adjusted quite yet. It's going to be hard, especially with global interest rates set to continue where they are. Mm-hmm. It's going to be difficult to compete with straight up commercial positions. Listed equities in the US are doing fantastically. Yeah. It's very difficult to compete with that. And obviously the risk is higher in our markets. But I think that if you can offer reasonable returns, a great narrative around impact, and a whole load of strategic benefits, because we shouldn't underestimate the fact that, it is an imprudent long-term investment strategy to not invest in Africa. If you're thinking again multi-generational as a family office, you need to make sure you've got some exposure to this continent.
Absolutely.
And so you get all of that strategic benefit, you get the learnings of what's going on in these markets, potentially some commercial activities may emerge that maybe is kind of tied to the original family wealth. So there could be opportunities to then also do some other kind of direct kind of family activity related investing in the continent. But effectively, I think we can offer returns, impact, and a whole of that strategic value. But right now, I don't think that there are many vehicles through which that family office can really be channeled into right now. And so, we're just feeling very focused on trying to be that conduit and mobilizing that private capital that's needed.
I think if you ever find your job difficult, I'm going to remind you that I think the role that you're playing is incredibly important for the ecosystem. And well done. Well done to you. And
trying.
So I think with that, and I'm following up with part of what you were saying about multi-generational, is how do you manage the expectations and preferences of different family members, especially across generations, like the four, the four grandchildren at the moment. How are you going about that?
So in a way, I think that there is a benefit of creating a slightly diversified strategy, such that it can tap into different people's interests. I will say, though, that as an overarching comment, I've talked a lot about transparency and reporting and all the rest. I have also learned that sometimes less is more, and that you just sometimes have to edit out. You've got to learn what are the sensitive spots for certain members of the family. So what gets them excited, but what are the sensitive spots?
So you have to spend a lot of time with them, I guess, to figure that out.
Yeah, a reasonable amount over time.
Okay.
And so certain family members are, it's funny. One individual in particular used to always get rather agitated when I did the annual budgeting process, and I showed a fairly high granularity on our annual budget, and then I'd put up a slide with all the team, and he always seemed to perceive it as I was just spending so much money on building out this massive team. And I think his fear was fixed costs, kind of liabilities, employment contracts, all this kind of stuff. In July, when I was there and I presented, and we've had a really strong year, and we're for the second year running fully profitable, and at the end, his only comment was, "And everything that you did wouldn't have even been possible if it weren't for your fantastic team." So, and I thought to myself, huh? That was like the last comment I expected to hear. But what I learned from that is that you've got to be just mindful of what the delicate points are for what triggers, right, certain members of the family, and edit those out, or kind of diminish how much you put a spotlight on those aspects. And then you've got to authentically, because you don't want to like flip-flop and just pander to what you think people want to hear. It's still got to be authentic to what you believe is the viable core strategy. But then what you do is, I think, you amplify certain aspects that will resonate all the more. And in a way, it's just good communication, sales and marketing. Yeah. And again, it's something that I've had to learn. Like, I just thought it was like, well, no, I mean, it's obvious that this is the team I need. Like, this is terribly frustrating, and it would get me quite frustrated that wasn't understood. And then increasingly I realised, oh, okay, it's a sensitivity. This individual is not actually saying I can't do it. They're not allowing me to have that budget. So they're not actually putting up any roadblocks. I'm just getting a little bit of like, pushback.
Yeah.
And so what I've learned is, as I say, diminish what triggers, amplify what resonates, but also have a degree of thick skin. I've had, through my career so far, 2 massive U-turns from family members. Got a call out of the blue, and we were doing this big restructure. We were going to restructure into a new jurisdiction, and we were substantially progressed. And then just one of the family members was just not comfortable, and just said no.
And that was it.
That was it. We were substantially progressed. But again, every decision that has come a little bit out of left field, actually in hindsight, I'm kind of relieved and pleased. Yeah. Because also, it's kind of the role of a board. It's kind of the role of like senior advisors, people who have that macro bird's eye view.
And I think who also show you your blind spots.
Yeah. And so it's exactly that. So I have to say, even at times where I've been deeply frustrated, because as I say, look, no investing role is perfect in terms of where you get your capital from. But substantially on a net basis, I am so privileged to work with this incredible family who really empower me and give me so much autonomy, but when necessary actually say, not sure, don't think we should do that. And pretty much 100 times out of 100 times, or in this instance it was like 2 or 3 times out of 2 or 3 times, but it's been spot on. And so again, it's a little bit, it's the same speaking to the value of a board. They may not be in the nitty gritty of your business, but the perspective of that macro who's not necessarily vested, who, hasn't, in the case of my restructuring, loads of sunk costs embarked on that restructure journey, it's very valuable.
Then what are some of the biggest, I think, trends and I think shifts that you're seeing with family offices? Because it sounds like this particular group might be unique, but I'm also not sure. So just love your take on that.
Yeah, I think it's what a lot of people are talking about in terms of like this next gen or Gen Z. I don't even know quite which decades they refer to, but I think the point is that you have a whole load of people who are very wealthy, who are beginning to ask, well, they didn't necessarily make the wealth. They're maybe at this point second or third generation. And they're asking themselves, well, what can we do with this capital? And actually, we want to have some impact. And what kind of impact? And so, we're very privileged as AHL because we're getting more and more exposure to kind of other networks and family offices, etc. And even, for example, one of the next gen family members and I together, we're going to be in this very closed roundtable event in Geneva at Christmas time with a whole load of other kind of next gen talking about our journey. So it's kind of like my journey with AHL and then his journey getting involved, also seeing it from the other side. I mean, he has an amazing role trying to coordinate and create cohesion amongst the family members to almost help me.
Okay.
So a lot of that individual conversations and consensus building he's doing on my behalf. So having that internal champion on the family side is really critical. But yeah, what I'm seeing is that people want to be engaged, like that next generation want to be engaged. And I think I was speaking to another high net worth actually who's set up his own family office. So he was the first generation. He's the entrepreneur who made the wealth for the family office. And he said the thing that is singularly most important for him is that it is not financial advisors who manage the family office, but it is that the family members understand and can not necessarily fully manage the family office, but that can be heavily involved in the family office.
Interesting.
And I feel like that's also where I'm seeing change. I think this role of a kind of...
we sit back.
Exactly. This asset manager who's, typically your older Caucasian gentleman in his very slick suit, who kind of comes in and says, this is our portfolio construction. We're going to do this real estate. We're going to do this global fixed income, these listed equities, blah, 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 blah. And who sits behind a desk kind of managing all that.
And your job as a family is just to consent because
Correct.
He's the one with the know-how.
I actually think that what we're beginning to see, or at least I'm seeing in our family and other limited families that we've engaged with, is that actually they want to do things that are meaningful. They want to, not with all the capital, but they want to invest where there can be impact as well as returns. But also more and more, I think typically there was hobby expenditure and wealth preservation and growth investment. And typically the family members didn't necessarily know about investing. And so we're a bit on the left side, or running the actual businesses that initially generated the wealth. So it's kind of your three categories. And where I'm excited is I think there's a lot more kind of next gen who are saying, I don't want to necessarily be in the family business. I don't want to do just hobby expenditure. I don't want to just give to select charities and then have my capital managed, not understanding any of it. I want to start thinking about doing something sizable and meaningful with my capital. So that might be, a large scale investment where they're the lead investor, or in the case of our family, setting up AHL Venture Partners and more putting a lot of capital into building, and funding that generation of great entrepreneurs and businesses. So I think that's a lot of what we're seeing, that shift where there's much greater desire to be involved. And so I think finding a way to get family members involved is really important. And I think that requires like empathy, a willingness to just be open, like patient, and transparency, and like bring them along the journey with you. Don't just look at them like a checkbook. I don't think that will get you very far.
I see it, I think, as an incredible opportunity, because what you're saying is that there's a significant amount of funding that could do very unconventional things and have significant impact. But I think the critical thing to get that right, I think, is the education piece on what can you do, what is available to you. And I think that's why the role that you have, and I think also working within emerging markets as well, that know-how, and again, the privilege of being in some of those rooms, Rosanne, puts you in a phenomenal space, I think, both to be an advocate, to really inspire real change. And so I think that's the added thing. In addition to, yes, the commercial returns and everything else, is that you're really paving the way in something that's completely different and something that's new. And who knows, maybe as a result of all the work that you do, we have many more family offices investing on the continent, and that would be real success. So
I very much hope so. And maybe added just to that quickly would be, I think we can share also so many of the lessons learned and the mistakes made. You know, it's so hard for so many other fund managers out there who constantly need to be out fundraising to necessarily be, you know, that transparent about where things haven't gone quite to plan. And again, I feel like as AHL, we've really been on a journey since 2007 when it was first established. And I think those lessons would be invaluable also to many other family offices embarking on a journey to try and do kind of more impactful type of investing. And I mean, you know, many of them are my mistakes. And I just don't know anyone in investing who hasn't made mistakes. It's hard, and there's no substitute for experience. And so I just think it's not realistic that, you know, we're not making mistakes. You know, I think it's the same for entrepreneurs too. And so I'd love a world in which we can also be maybe a bit more transparent than normal in the market around some of our lessons learnt. Because I also think that's really important to help, you know, shift the needle and help that next generation of GPs coming up maybe not make some of the same mistakes we made.
No, brilliantly said. And so we have a closing tradition where we ask, how can this community, and I mean the Doers Defined community, because there's a lot of people who are both influential, I think some are learning, how can they be useful to you in this journey as you continue growing AHL?
Well, firstly, it's a lovely way of phrasing it, and thank you for the help already. I mean, look, I think one of my points I made earlier, like great qualified referrals from awesome entrepreneurs in market, local diverse teams, that would be fantastic. But I also think it is a team sport. So I do think we need to be co-investing more, so to other investors out there who feel that they're kind of quite value aligned with what we're trying to do. Would love to hear from you all. But then also I think it's be an advocate for the continent. I think we just have to reframe the narrative. I think still so many people in the global north just don't know quite how incredible it is here and the opportunity, and that there are opportunities to make money. And that's a good thing. Like, unfortunately, we do live in a globalized and a capitalistic society. And so it is important that we can demonstrate that for the flow of capital into our markets. So I would say that's another thing. And then maybe for those a bit more politically connected or able to influence policy, I think we do have to really think about making this an attractive environment from a regulatory standpoint, because the reality again is capital is fickle.
Yep.
Global capital is fickle.
Yep.
And so it can go in many different places. And if we want to attract it here, we have to be able to demonstrate stable policies, regulation, and the like. And I think that uncertainty around policy and regulatory frameworks and the like is challenging. So I think that's probably the other area that I think we could all probably work on a bit more.
Thank you. And thank you so much for just, I think, coming on the podcast, educating us on family offices. And I think also sharing, very gracefully, a lot of the hard work that goes into creating the governance and the structures of something that wasn't really there. And also letting us hear and listen to your insights about what you hope to build with AHL. And I wish you nothing but success. And I know you'll do incredible. I think my job is to just rally behind you, perhaps maybe increase those qualifying leads, here and there. But I'm so delighted that you were able to share this with us.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight.